look at why do we need to take a systems approach, and then do a little bit of unpacking. What is a system? How do systems change? And then I am going to invite you to have a go yourself, and think about a challenge that you're working on that might benefit from a bit of systems diagnostics. And depending on the group size, we'll do that in two groups or one big group. But I'll set that up. It's not terribly complicated, but might be helpful. And then actually, Andy has heard quite a bit of this before. I'm just going to finish up with a little insight into personal resilience in volatile times. And the spoiler alert is that actually understanding the world as a set of systems actually is helpful when we're thinking about building our personal resilience. So that's where I'm going to finish. And then we can have a Q&A as I'm talking, because there is a lot of slides heading your way. If I say anything and something's not clear or you have a question, just come off mute and interrupt me. I really don't mind, or put a little yellow hand up. But if you want to interrupt me, that is totally fine. If we were in a room, we would be having more of a conversation, but it's much harder to do that when we're all online. Does that sound all right? Brilliant. Okay. Just kind of then level setting where we are. And this is one of my favorite slides of the moment. And I start every presentation pretty much with this slide right now, because sustainability is facing lots of headwinds. You'll all be very familiar with this. There was a very senior guy that left Davos in January, said, "Oh, sustainability is dead." And then, we hear lots of sort of, "Oh, sustainability is not as important. No one's doing sustainability anymore." I mean, there's so much misinformation and disinformation in the system, which is very deliberate, and we'll come on to why that might be the case. But I just wanted to start with sustainability is very alive. It's very well. It's just different. And this speaks to that systems approach, because sustainability compared to procurement or marketing or HR is actually a very young profession. It's probably 30 years old, maybe 32, 33, but it's not very old. And you would expect it to keep changing. And so I've deliberately chosen a picture of a shifting landscape, a living system. And everything I'm going to be sharing today is based on living systems. That's the practice that we use at Forum. And we would expect it to keep changing. So I just wanted to kind of contextualize this discussion and essentially say it's no surprise that there are always headwinds and tailwinds. And then this slide is very helpful if you have anybody on your board or anybody else that is saying, what's happening to sustainability? And I'll share these slides afterwards. We can just look at the facts. So the science, which is the imperative to focus on sustainability. Excuse me, there's a bit of pollen around today. Science hasn't changed, and if anything, on a weekly basis, the science is becoming even clearer as to why we need to address climate and nature. Also, the indicators around social dimensions are not heading in the right direction. The business case hasn't changed, and if anything, with the shenanigans happening in the Straits of Hormuz have actually been intensified. Lots of articles that actually this really awful war has actually accelerated the energy transition in many, many ways. I've talked about the fact that change happens in cycles. Then there's lots of fun facts like the one here from Harvard Business Review. Companies are holding steady. And just to sidestep into the US, where I do a lot of work, I was there last week and I was there at the big middle of May in Chicago. And US companies are still focusing on sustainability. They're just very quiet about it because of all these executive orders, which make it very hard to talk publicly. But the work continues for sure. Transitions are in full flow, and I'll talk in a minute about the energy transition. Legislation, despite all the hoo-ha and the grumbling about CSDDD, CSRD, is actually continuing to evolve and is supporting these key transitions. And one of the most durable aspects of the business case for sustainability that I see is actually employees, and the fact that this agenda is really important, particularly to a younger cohort. But having said all of that, bumpy geopolitics are definitely here to stay. This slide is also helpful, maybe, talks about how change does happen in cycles. This is from innovation practice, Gartner's hype cycle. Some of you may well have seen this before, but talks about waves of change when a new innovation comes into the market. And we can use this cycle to really shine a light on what's happened with ESG. ESG was never designed to catalyze the transformation of our economic system. And again, I'm going to touch on that in a little while. It's a risk adjusted mechanism to look at risk associated with social and environmental performance. But when the ESG really grabbed hold, there was definitely a sense of ESG is brilliant, it's going to solve all of our problems. And it was never intended to do that. So there was a big gap between what we expected from ESG and what actually the reality was. And there are always controversies, resistance to any transitions. And so we always see in mainstream of any new practice or any systems transition, the fact that perception and reality diverge. And so for sustainability, the big question is, how long is it going to take for the lines to meet? And we can talk about that if you like. I have a view. And just a little bit of sprinkling of good news. The energy transition is pretty now unstoppable. China has almost reached the tipping point for renewable energy, in fact, actually has in terms of peak fossil fuel usage. And that's because the price of renewable now in many parts of the world is cheaper. And we've managed to solve for issues around battery storage and so on and so forth. So again, if you're having conversations when people say, oh, will we shift to a renewable energy system? We're almost there in many parts of the world. And in parts of Africa, we're seeing leapfrogging. We're seeing decentralized renewable energy grids laid down. And actually, we're just stepping over the fossil fuel driven sources. So that's where we are. And it's really important to zoom out because on a day-to-day basis, being in sustainability at the moment can feel a little hard and can feel as though we're going backwards. And yes, we might have gone backwards a little bit, but we will go forwards again. Why then do we need to take a systems approach? And there's two main reasons for this. The first is that actually we are having to navigate quite complex systems at the moment. And we sometimes adopt frameworks and approaches that are more applicable to a simple system. So baking a cake is a very simple system. You have a recipe, you bake a cake, pretty much it comes out as you would expect. Clearly, we all have had cake disasters, but it's a simple process, it's a simple system. A more complicated system is a PC, lots of different parts, but again, we can look at the manual, we can troubleshoot. But a complex system would be a socio-economic system around raising a child. Here, you have a child, but the child is interfacing with lots of other systems, and there are some aspects of the child's behavior you can try and control. There are others that you really can't control. And actually, a child is a complex system sitting in nested systems. And why we need to think about systems is we tend to skew towards thinking that things are simple, that we can look at a manual and we can solve for an issue. And signs that we're using simple solutions to complex problems. And remember, there's a difference between complex and complicated. Just because something is complicated, it doesn't have to be complex, is that the problem keeps getting worse. The problem goes away and then comes back again. We can only solve part of it. And this may all begin to sound quite familiar. And this is the first reason why we need to take a systems approach, because climate change, biodiversity, structural inequality are complex problems. And this is one of my favorite sentences. If you've never read any of Donella Meadows, and I know a few of you on the call will have definitely read her work, this speaks to why we need to think in systems. So Donella Meadows gets the prize for the most complex sentence constructor. The world is a complex, interconnected, finite, ecological, social, psychological, economic system, but we treat it as though the world was a set of little cakes. And actually, the fact that we keep thinking of the world as simple, as linear, is one of the reasons why we're not solving for the problems that we need to solve for. The second reason we need to think in systems is that not only are the challenges that we're facing in sustainability systemic challenges, they are complex challenges. The more we can think about systems and the more we can design for systems change, the more we can shape what happens next. And this is obviously a very well-known chart from the UN, but talks about the fact that, yes, climate impacts are now baked into our system. So one of the facts I use a lot to try and wake people up to this, and I'm still having to wake people up to the science, somebody born in 2020, so a 5 or a 6-year-old in your life will now experience 8 times more heat waves, 6 times more crop failures than someone born in 1960. There's nothing we can do about that. That is baked in. However, what we do now and what we do next will determine whether or not we can stabilize a climate, probably, if we're really lucky, to 2.2 degrees by the end of the century in terms of an elevation in global temperatures. At the moment, we're on a trajectory for more than 4. We know at that point, food systems don't work. This is where it gets very, very bleak. We've overshot 1.5, absolutely. But the point is that if we can think in systems and design solutions for these systemic challenges, climate change is one of the most urgent, then we can shape what happens next. The future isn't written. At any one point in time, there are different plural possible futures available to us. And thinking in systems allows us to perhaps design transition system solutions to these challenges. And in the case of climate, may hold temperatures to a level at which we can adapt. Big question mark as to whether we can or we can't. And so what this all means is that we really have to raise our ambition when we're designing for sustainability interventions, for sustainability strategies. And this is the rub at the moment. The urgency around these challenges has never been greater. The ability to deliver solutions at scale has probably never been harder. And that's why really embracing systems thinking could help us all at this moment in time. I like to talk about different waves of sustainability. We started 30 years or so ago where it was about minimizing negative impacts, doing less harm. We then, 20 years ago, started to talk about water neutrality, waste neutrality. Note at this point, no mention of the social dimensions of sustainability. The social agenda really only crept in maybe 15 years ago. Forum was one of the co-authors of Net Positive, a set of principles for business to put more back into the environment, more back into society than they took out. I was one of the authors of that, and I thought at the time, this is pretty cool. If we can put more back into ecosystems, put more back into communities, build resilience in those systems, then great. But then it struck me, and again, it's not a particularly amazing insight, but unless we shift how the underlying systems work, then we'll always need to keep putting more back. And the analogy here is a very simple one. If you imagine a bucket with a hole in it, if we don't fix that hole, we're going to need to keep pouring water into the bucket or whatever that liquid is. And so for me, where we need to be designing for and where we need to be positioning our vision, our purpose, is what I call 4.0, and this is just and regenerative. This is where we start to reconfigure our underlying systems so that actually those systems can support humans, planet, interlink to thrive into the future. And so at Forum, we've done a lot of work on what we mean by just and regenerative. We've published 2 guidance documents to enable businesses to define just and regenerative, to develop visions, to integrate just and regenerative into practice. I'm smiling because the last version was published in February last year, possibly the worst time ever to say it's time to raise our ambition. And using the word of justice in the US is pretty difficult at the moment. And I think just and regenerative is probably too complex. And there are other ways, I think, of describing what we mean. But what we mean is actually we've recognized planetary boundaries. We need to operate within them. We know we need to create and distribute economic value in different ways. One of the big drivers behind, I think, the headwinds, certainly we've seen in the US, we're seeing here in the UK and in Europe, is that people don't feel part of this conversation. They feel left behind. And that's really one of the features of the current economic model. Again, I'll come back to that. We've also forgotten that we are part of nature. I still sit in meetings where senior executives say, oh, we'll be able to solve for this climate crisis. And, we're going to be okay. And actually not respecting the fact that we won't be okay, because actually the planet probably will be okay. It will just change, evolve. Big question is whether we will be here to see it. And then again, respecting people's rights, potential to thrive. What I keep meaning to do with this slide is to create a sort of easy to understand version. The fifth bullet, though, is easy to understand in that if we're going to shift to that higher ambition of sustainability, we have to get much better at collaboration and much better at systems change, which is the conversation today. So why systems then? Going back to that Donella Meadows quote, the world is full of messy, interconnected, nested systems. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. We like to believe that the world is a linear pathway from A to B. And I don't know about you, but I have stood in front of a flip chart when I'm saying, we're here now, we need to get to there. And here are some nice little Gantt charts that move us along that track. But actually, the world doesn't operate like that. We know that everything is interconnected and everything is nested. If we think back to the early days of the energy transition and the bright idea to switch tracts of land to create biofuels, we didn't think through the unintended consequences of the fact that actually that land was productive land and we need it for food. And so systems thinking is understanding the connections and understanding how to avoid unintended consequences. And climate science, biodiversity, structural inequality is littered with interventions that have led to unintended consequences because we haven't embraced this messy blue squiggle. So, what is a system? It's essentially a set of parts with a particular function. So a bicycle is a very simple system. It is a set of parts, two wheels, pedals, a handlebar, a seat if you are lucky, with a very specific purpose to get you from A to B. A transportation system is a more complicated system. Now you've got the interplay of private vehicles, public transport, lots more people, lots more complexity, but it's still a system and it's nested systems, people, cars, private vehicles, and it still has a very clear function to enable people to move around a city. And this is where calling out the function of a system is really important. A system can also be a social system. Education is a system. It can be a socioeconomic system. The food system is a socioeconomic system, so is the energy system. Our health service is a system. And systems change is about reorientating the structure and flow of the parts towards a new goal. And so a really simple and tongue-in-cheek example is here. The bicycle on the left has lost its handlebars and its seat. We've put some wood across the top and now the bicycle is a table. We've changed the interaction of the parts. We've created a new function. On the right, we've flipped the bicycle on its side. We put poles either side of it. It's now a gate. And so systems change is about calling out a different function for the system and then enabling the reorientation of the structure and flow of that system. And here is the most important aspect of probably what I'm going to say is systems aren't broken. They do what they were designed to do. So when we hear on the news and when we read, oh, the food system is broken, the economic system is broken, the health system is broken, from a systems perspective, that isn't strictly true. Our current economic system was conceptualized at the end of the Second World War, was set down in something called the Bretton Woods Agreement with a very specific goal of profit maximization to enable the rapid recovery of a global economy still reeling from the impacts of a Second World War. Our current food system, the current version of the food system, our food system that has lots of different versions, But the current version, again, was conceptualized after the Second World War to enable access to calories, not nutrition, to a growing population. And so our current systems were designed with a very different purpose in mind. And so what we need to be doing right now is re-articulating the goal of a system. So what if the economy, yes, had goals around economic value creation, but also had a goal around enabling us to respond to climate, enabling us to enable distribution of value in new ways? The economy starts to do something different. And just bringing that to life then, traditional investing maintains the current status quo. It has the primacy of shareholders as the goal. It's about profit maximization. Nothing changes. ESG actually starts to shift the goal of the economy because it's saying we're going to adjust the rate of return according to environmental and social risk. Impact investing actually is saying we're investing not just for economic return, but also investing in ways for initiatives that deliver environmental and societal positive impacts. Now, we can't switch the economy overnight to 100% impact investing because that will just disrupt the system too much. But over time, we can allocate more capital towards impact investing, and the economy will begin to do something differently. If we think about today and the billions of dollars that are going into nature-based solutions, that's a brilliant example of the system shifting. If we think about the work that Aviva are doing, they're one of our partners at Forum, doing some incredible work on climate adaptation, investment in nature-based solutions. They want to make nature an investable asset. That is shifting the goal of the economy, and that's calling out the fundamental role of nature in climate adaptation. I'll just give you one more example and then I'll pause to see if this, as my colleagues in the US would say, is tracking. So again, let's take the food system. At the moment, the primary mechanism for looking at the productivity of the food system, and this was set up, as I say, nearly 100 years ago, is yield. That maintains the current system. Energy efficiency targets, water efficiency targets, shifting contracts in some ways that starts to share risk with producers is shifting the goal of the system. But the beauty and magnificence of regenerative agriculture is calling out a different set of goal for the system. So regenerative agriculture is saying we want the goal of the food and ag system to be equal access to nutrition, not calories, with that nutrition produced in ways that restores and protects ecosystems, not degrades it, and also delivers a living wage to producers. Often farmers don't get the cost of production. By calling out a different set of goals for the food system starts to do something differently, and that's what's happening today. But let me just pause there and see if that is making sense. I don't know how I will know. I suppose if there's a question, then come off mute and ask me a question. Otherwise, I'll assume that that is making some degree of sense.
Thanks, Sally. I think I'll have a go. For me, it makes total sense. Thank you for that. I think you talked about the plurality of the system. I think I'd add to that the plurality of capabilities that are required, because it is a whole system. We are the system. We're not just nature. We are the system. So we're of the stars, which I've always found difficult to say until I did a bit more work on regeneration. But it's we are that system. We're totally interdependent, a lot more than any of us, even I understand. And we touch a lot on health in regeneration, which I think is really, really important. The only thing you can put in the centre of a system, if you can put anything, and that's still a big question mark, I suppose, but is about well-being and health, which is planetary health and our health as other living systems like humans and nature and what have you. But thank you. Very, very clear.
Perfect, brilliant. And I'm going to come on to capabilities for systems thinking as well. I've got a little slide I can show you on that. But thank you for that. And also this focus on One Health is brilliantly systemic. Carly, who's on the call, knows we have something called the Climate and Health Coalition, where we're trying to really shine a light on those connections. So if that's what we mean by systems, and why calling out the function of a system is so important and articulating the goal of the system, how then on earth do systems change? Some of you will have seen this chart before, I am sure. But at Forum, this is my favorite framework for explaining how systems change and for designing systems projects. It's something called the multi-level perspective. It's not new, it's an academic framework, hence the language of regime. But it talks about the fact that any system, be it the food system, the energy system, the economic system, and organization, operates at three levels. You've got that landscape level part of the system where big picture trends will play through. So climate change is a landscape level trend, so is demographic change. Then in the middle, the mainstream, you've got that part of the system where we all go about our day-to-day lives. This is where shifts in legislation, shifts in consumer perception will play through. And then any system in a really exciting way has a niche, the edge of a system, where innovations will bubble up, bubble down. And some of you, my favorite example is 3D food printing. So there was a time where everyone was really excited about 3D food printing. When it's in the niche, it started to bubble to the mainstream. We had a couple of restaurants in London that were offering 3D printed food. It tasted horrible, and suddenly it'd gone back down to the niche. So systems change when those landscape level pressures make themselves felt and the day-to-day, coupled with innovation scaling from the niche. But critically, the magic ingredient is people willing to do things differently. And if we think about the energy transition, we've known about the science in relation to climate for a while. We have had access to renewable energy, but what it took for the energy transition to enter into this accelerated phase of systems change generally has three phases: the startup phase, where those landscape pressures are felt, that accelerated phase of systems change, which is not linear. Another reason why it feels so turbulent and volatile right now. It's like a tide moving in one direction. It goes in, it goes out, it moves around. But to enter that accelerated phase of systems change, we need innovation to scale from the niche. And with energy, what we had around the time of the Paris Agreement is we understood the climate science. We then, for the first time, had renewable energy that was reaching price parity with fossil fuels. And now, obviously, it's much cheaper in many parts of the world. But we had the political will. We had politicians, we had businesses willing to do something differently. And so this accelerated phase of systems change is where we are in energy. I think we're moving towards the stabilization phase of a new system. We're certainly, when it comes to the food system transition, economy, health, you name it, we're in that middle section, which is why it feels so turbulent. And then we have the stabilization of a new system. And so these are the strategies that we're going to come back to in a little while and have a play with and see how they might apply to your own organizational strategy or a collaboration strategy that you're focused on. But it's really important to call out the strategies that drive change, because that helps us design for systems change and understand what might be missing. So at that startup phase of systems change, we've got to make the case for change clearly. But critically, we need to ensure that information starts to flow around the system in different ways and reaches different people, because that knowledge then invites people to do things differently. I've talked about the need for innovation. Those three levers are critical to push into that accelerated phase of systems change, where we need to call out the different set of goals. How are we describing the goal of the system we want to see emerging? Collaboration is critical. The only organization I can think of that shifted an entire system was Apple, when they reimagined the role of digital technology. But mostly you need collaboration. And critically, you need the right incentives, the right business models, access to finance. And then for a new system to stabilize, we need to support culture, societal norms, mindsets. and we need to create rules and measures, and we need to shift policy. And this is why policy interventions that are designed to drive systemic change can fail, because they can come in too soon in the systems transition, and there isn't the underlying culture, societal norm to accept that policy. So many examples of that happening. And so if we take regenerative agriculture, I've talked about energy transition, then we've made the case for change. There are so many stats, X many harvests less because of poor soil quality, which has been eroded by lots of agricultural practices. The COP process, the climate process now has got food incorporated. And so the COP process is also looking at how we want the food system goals to shift. There are so many collaborations in regenerative agriculture. There's one between Walmart and General Mills, but there are many, many others converting thousands of hectares of land to regenerative agricultural practices. And then what we've got a lot better at doing is using standard debt instruments like bond instruments to enable access to finance, but discounted interest rates according to, in the case of the Olam Agri HSBC loan, how quickly Olam Agri decarbonize. Ahold Delhaize, a global retailer based in the Netherlands, they've been using debt instruments as well. So has Electrolux, effectively using these kind of discounted debt instruments to get access to capital to rapidly decarbonize or convert to regenerative agriculture. So that's where we are in Regen Ag, in that accelerated phase of systems change. And we're beginning to see brands talk about how the fact that regenerative agriculture practice, and I'm being really careful here because we've got a lot of work in this space. The science around the links between soil health and nutrient density is still emerging. But we know that how we farm our land impacts our health, it impacts our environment. And we are seeing legislation come in that supports this transition. But this is also why it feels so tough at the moment. In any systems transition, the closer you get to a new system emerging, the harder the existing system pushes back. Because in any systems transition, there are activating forces, but there are resisting forces, and they are very, very strong at the moment and very powerful. And inequality compounds the strength of those resisting forces, because inequality often can lead to disenfranchisement with political mechanisms, with voting, with politics more generally. We're definitely seeing that here in the UK. And actually, democracy is really important to many of these transitions. So that's another reason why it feels so tough at the moment. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about systems change practice, systemic skills, and then I'm going to throw it open for you all to have a play with that framework. So the first thing to say here is that systems change is a process. I've described that. It's an outcome, but it's also a practice. In order to shift systems, and the previous remark really shone a light on this, we all need to think and act in more systemic ways. And so we use this framework a lot in our School of Systems Change. In order to cultivate systems change, we need to understand the system, understand the links between the system. We need to decide where in the system to intervene, what are the leverage points. And again, back to Donella Meadows, she talked about different leverage points for systems change. And the deepest lever for systems change isn't policy, isn't access to finance, it's our mindset. And we've done a lot of work on this at Forum. And then we need to learn and adapt as we're trialing these interventions, all designed to shift the goals and boundaries of the system. And so that systems diagnostic then is zooming out from the particular part of the system that you can see to understanding how the individual parts relate, those interconnections, looking at how the system is working. And by doing this, and you can do this using systems maps, we do this a lot at Forum, you can find areas in the system that might be ripe for change. So back to our Climate Health Coalition, the reason we were able to get that up and running is that we could see that there was a readiness for change within climate teams to look at the links between climate and health. We need to then change relationships in the system, and all the time sense making, experimenting. If you were in a room right now, I'd get you to do a little game where I'd ask you to position yourself equidistant between two people. And if everyone starts to do that, you start to see the system move, and you see patterns in the system. Systems are dynamic, they're not static. And so this is a diagram I was mentioning. So what do systemic practices look like? Enabling the system to see itself, zooming in, zooming out, understanding the whole picture, working at different levels in a system, looking at connections, critically engaging in different perspectives. Again, I think one of the reasons why we've seen aspects around sustainability stall is that I don't think we've done a great job of engaging different perspectives. I think sustainability has tended to operate in an echo chamber. We've used very long words that people don't understand, and actually engaging different perspective is really critical to delivering system solutions. Understand that we all have agency and power, back to being part of nested systems. And again, this is quite empowering at this moment in time because we are all part of a nested system. Everything we do really, really matters because it creates ripples in the system. Again, another characteristics of systemic practices is designing for Horizon 1, Horizon 2, Horizon 3, so holding multiple perspectives. And instead of shying away from complexity, get yourself a little systems map and embrace it. And then the final thing to mention and to underscore, for any systems transition, we have to work not only with the people that think we're talking sense and that might be coming with us on this journey, but we have to engage across the system with those resisting forces. So two little charts to show you. We're not going to do this one today, but I can share this afterwards. So if you want to map a system in which you're operating, and you obviously need to draw the boundary around that system, you can use this framework to understand, well, what's happening in the landscape, what is currently unsustainable in the mainstream, which stakeholders are resisting change and how which stakeholders are working with you on the change, where are the innovations coming from. So this enables you to map according to the levers for change. But the framework that I wanted to offer up for a little testing today is this one here. So the invitation, and we can talk about whether we want to split into groups or not in a moment. And I realize I haven't shared this ahead of time, so you might need to take a screenshot of this with your phones, is the invitation is think about, maybe it's a collaboration that you're involved in right now, or maybe it's an organizational strategy. Have you made the case for change? Are you influencing powerful stakeholders? What are you doing to shift culture? How is information flowing through the system? And that generally takes its form of new guidance documents. Have you got coalitions of the willing? What policies are you working on? What are those incentive structures that need to be in place? What might be the new rules and measures? And then what are the innovations that need to be scaled in order for the system to begin to change? And when we use this framework in workshops, what we tend to find is that there might be levers that aren't being pulled, and that's okay, because that's maybe where you might want to form collaborations to pull those levers. Or it could be that you're over-indexing on one lever. Lots of collaborations, and some of our early collaborations are definitely like this. We created guidance documents and then expected the system to shift. A guidance document in of its own won't shift anything at all. We need to think about who we're influencing, how we're influencing. So that is the invitation to look at this and to see how it might apply to one of your collaborations. And I'm going to now ask Suella whether we want to stay as a group and keep this on the screen and have a conversation, get people to perhaps describe a collaboration that they're working on, how the levers that they're focused on map to this, or we could take a screenshot so everyone's got this on their phone and move into 2 breakout groups. I've really wanted to spend a bit more time recently on personal resilience because we live in nested systems, and particularly in the US, noticing that personal resilience was, really being depleted by the very, very tough operating context. And the reason why personal resilience is so critical is we are nested systems, and for an organization to be resilient, it needs people within those organizations to feel resilient. And the framing point is exactly the squiggles, because understanding that the world is a set of interconnected systems means understanding this, that actually being human in a volatile, turbulent world, in the midst of multiple systems transitions that are all nested, then being human is not so much being the captain of a super yacht, which we'd like sometimes to think that we are. We're at the helm of the yacht, we see turbulence, we shift gears, we take the steering wheel, we kind of pivot the ship. Actually, being human in a world full of messy, interconnected systems that are all in transition is much more like being in a kayak, in that you've got some control. You've got your kayak, you've got your paddle, you've got a little life jacket, you might have a little snack, but you're also subject to more turbulence than if you're in the super yacht. And accepting that you're in the kayak means that you can design for that and ask yourself, is this the next slide? Yes. For my kayak, what do I need? And the beauty also about a kayak is that if it gets really choppy, you can actually walk out of the water and put the kayak on your shoulders and just walk for a little bit. And so kind of really paying attention to what you need in your kayak. And I've got a whole range of different personal resilience hacks that, we won't be going into today, but kind of visualizing yourself in the kayak and imagining what you need. And that might be sometimes to let the kayak float. It might mean paddling. Just really, well, it helps me because this is one of my favorite quotes of all time. Again, Donella Meadows. And there's two really important parts about this quote. We can't predict the future, but we can bring it lovingly into being by designing for the future that we want. That was my starting point. Our economy today, our society today is a function of the decisions we made yesterday. All the decisions we make today will determine what happens next, because we live in a world of nested systems and you can't control systems. And so where we might feel overwhelm and anxiety is we don't feel completely in control, because systems are dynamic. They've got their own energy. They're full of different people. But whilst we can't control systems, we can dance with them. We can understand the energy in a system. We can understand what's happening in a system at any particular moment in time and flow with that energy and use that energy and encourage it to move in a slightly different direction. And so this notion of dancing with systems was very powerful for me, because it gives us agency, it gives us the ability to influence, and recognizes the fact that nobody can control the world around them. Nobody, not even President Trump. So that's kind of, for me, the framing of the kayak. And then I've got two more things I wanted to leave you with. This is my compass for navigating 2026. I produced a first version of this last year, and I've made a couple of tweaks. But essentially, as we're sort of, navigating this messy world, what are the things we need to pay attention to? So going around the compass, N is clearly for North Star, that clarity of vision, purpose, that future that we want to create. E, we haven't talked a lot about this, but it's all about economics. Sustainability has to deliver commercially right now. Really difficult conversation if it doesn't. But that's where you can talk about the different horizons. S is for specifics. Sarah, your question before, we weren't specific enough about sustainability, and that sustainability is about affordable food, it's about strong communities, it's about healthy nature. W is worldview. It's easy to get distracted by the constant torrent of noise that spurts out of the White House. But there's a whole world around us, and the energy transition is in full flow in China, in Latin America, in Africa. And then going around again, this is my change for this year, nuanced engagement. I mentioned earlier, talking publicly in the US, for example, and in some parts of the UK is about climate, is harder. So what is the nuanced engagement? How do we target specific stakeholder groups with very specific messages? How do we take advantage of what I call closed door dialogue? The conversation continues, it's just not public for now. I've talked about employees being a really durable aspect of the business case. And shift words. I still don't understand why Ed Miliband is cracking on about net zero. It's just playing into reform's hand. Why is he not talking about energy security? We need to talk about energy security, food security, resilience, innovation, growth to a point. But shifting words, really important. And security is just a really great alternative. And then the theme of the whole conversation, narratives win. And that's why reform is doing so well. And it's why the we here is all of us that care about our climate, care about people, care about our future. We need to create a narrative that says, actually, everything we're doing right now to shape the future that we want is all about a better world, a better future that works for everybody. And that narrative needs to win. And yeah, I'll go back to where I started. Brilliant quote from William Gibson, science writer. The future is already here. It's all around us. It's just not evenly distributed. So a new energy system is already here. It's at the edges, not so much at the edges anymore. A new food system is already here, already coming into the mainstream. A new health system based upon preventative healthcare, based upon the principles of One Health. It's already here. It just needs to come into the mainstream. And for all of us that care about this agenda, the most amazing opportunity we have right now is to bring all of this brilliant stuff at the edges of our system, at the niche, and bring it into the mainstream. What a time to be doing the work that we're doing. I'm done. That was 47 slides in an hour and a half.
Thank you,
Thank
Sally.
you very much,
Round
Sally.
of
Thank you
applause.
so
Goodness
much.
me.
Hope you all, thank you all
Thank
for
you,
joining,
Sally.
and thank you, big thanks to Sally for doing this. I mean, if you send me your slides, I will send them around to. And thank you very much, everybody, for making the time to join this.
And if you liked any of this, I have been recording a podcast, even though everyone said to me, Sally, the world does not need a new podcast. I've decided the world needs a podcast on Dancing with Systems. So watch out for more of where this comes from.
Send me a link and I'll share that with the group.
Yeah, we're just recording it right now, but we're calling it Dancing with Systems, and we want to demystify these transitions and get some energy behind them.
Lovely, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Carly.
Thank you very much,
Sally
everybody. Enjoy the rest of
Thanks
your
for
day.
your time. Bye.
Brilliant. Thanks so much.
Just going to end the recording.